So, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. My name is John Lunn, aka Jonnychipz, and in this video series we talk about all things cloud with experts and advocates from across the industry covering a wide variety of topics from skills and careers through to technical and soft skill videos. So whether you're watching this on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter or LinkedIn, thanks so much for tuning in. It really is appreciated. Please do take part in the chat below. Drop us a comment, a like and subscribe. That would be absolutely fantastic. Okay, so my next guest is based out of South Carolina in the USA and is a cloud evangelist working at Tracery at the moment. You can be found across the socials talking about all things cloud related and sharing some great perspectives. So on that note, I'm super excited and honoured to welcome my next guest on In Conversation With as Mr. Derek Smith. Hey, Derek, how you doing?
Good, Johnny. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure being here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, here we go. We got this awkward delay now, haven't we, that we've got to try and work around.
So we'll chalk it up. We'll chalk it up to time difference.
Absolutely. So how's things with yourself, Derek? Thanks so much for giving you time to jump on a show with me.
No, appreciate you having me on here. And things are going great. Weather is good. Finally in, my preferred season. I love winter time and fall because I snowboard avidly. Even though I'm over here in the southeastern part of the United States, which isn't, I would consider a mountainous area, but there are places nearby that I can go and get snowboarding in. And then, if I really desperately need to, I can always travel somewhere and do that. So it's my favorite time of the year. It's my family's favorite time of the year. They're huge holiday folks. So it's been a busy time, not only here in the household, but at work as well. So it's been fun.
No, absolutely. See, it's a lovely time of year, the fall, obviously, like you say, we're getting nights are drawing in a bit, the weather's getting a little bit colder. So, I like your perspective on that one. I think it's certainly like that most of the time, most of the year round in the UK. So, I think we just got to get used to it in the UK.
But yeah, you guys have different weather patterns, but it's I think preferred. I'll take your weather over 90-degree and 100% humidity any day of the week.
Yeah. I think I know where you're going with that. Yeah, absolutely. So, Derek, we had a chat now just before we hit record around a few areas that we're going to talk around. And I know you're a guy working in the industry, very similar lines to myself, in that kind of cloud architecture role. So it'll be cool if we dip into some of those areas, look to how you kind of service your customers and what kind of things you get involved with. But look, we've had a nice quick intro from you there, but do you want to dig into your role a little bit more, Derek? Give us a little bit more of an intro. Let us know what you're up to, who you're working for, all that good stuff. That'd be cool to start things off.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do Azure Cloud Evangelism for Trace3. They're based out of California, but they're a national cloud solutions provider that works with all the major clouds. So even though my focus may be on Azure, we do AWS and GCP as well. But it's my role to not only take part in a lot of community efforts, so evangelizing various Azure-based solutions within the community and with our clients and other partners that we may work with, but also I work internally within Trace3 to kind of evangelize our group as well. So our cloud solutions group, I'm kind of responsible for their overall brand as it relates both externally and internally. So everybody is my customer, so to speak. So not only do I get to, treat our sales teams as customers, but I treat our clients as our customers as well. So, but yeah, before that, I've been operating within the Azure world for a little over 5 years now. And before that, I was a network engineer. So that was kind of my transition into cloud. I, did a lot of Cisco based networking projects, always dabbled in Windows Server. That never was something that I ever truly got away from after I left the help desk. But after I moved out here to South Carolina, my company that I worked for at the time was doing a huge Office 365 migration off of Lotus Notes. So hopefully that's not dating the company too bad. But yeah, kind of once we did that migration over into Office 365, obviously, the world of the cloud was kind of opened up to me, and it's, been slowly just getting deeper and deeper ever since.
Yeah, and it certainly seems to be the way, doesn't it? I think it's the
Yeah.
way for everybody at the moment. Is that it's quite funny, really. I mean, the number of people I've spoken to where the first foray into the cloud is a messaging one of some kind of a messaging platform being moved into 365, or one of the message hygiene products before that. And it is very surprising how far we've come, and really how far I guess businesses have come with adopting and using these ever-changing features of the cloud.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of when Office 365 first launched, I mean, it was very, I want to say, email centric, right? Exchange online. And then, you kind of tacitly used SharePoint or Link. Link. It's changed so many names in the last decade. It's hard to date myself here. So yeah, Link. And then, as it's now slowly built out, I mean, Microsoft 365 now is just this huge SaaS platform with so many different features and services. I mean, it's become its own world and ecosystem separate from Azure. So, let alone somebody being an expert in Azure, having to be, a deep expert in M365. I mean, that's a huge order for any of us. So it's got some great collaboration capabilities between those, cloud platforms. But yeah, we've come a long way in 11 years.
Oh no, absolutely. I think just that kind of first foot into the cloud back 10, 11 years ago, it very much was, like you say, that messaging step, and maybe some kind of a synchronization, that identity management piece. How do we get it?
Yep.
I remember, it was always the same kind of conversation, wasn't it? Right, we sync our user identities, we've got the password hash synced up with Azure AD, and I remember back then Azure AD wasn't even half the product that it is today.
Oh, not even close. Yeah.
It was just literally a directory services to make your SaaS applications, give them the ability to log in, I guess. I mean, things have moved on significantly, Derek. I mean, what is it like now in the position that you're in with, kind of helping those customers? Maybe they haven't had that first kind of footprint into the cloud. Where do you tend to start that conversation with your customers now, Derek?
A lot of the times I start my conversations with customers because, right, they've seen the progression of cloud. They've seen the progression of the trends over the last decade plus. And, for the longest time, I think a lot of clients have kind of held off, thinking that, hey, I've already got my data center. All my stuff is here. It's bought, it's paid for. They're in that kind of CapEx mentality. They've been in, hey, I've already got all my equipment. There's no need to really touch it. So, 5 to 7 years is, the typical lifespan of, server infrastructure and things of that nature. So a lot of clients kind of kick that bottle down the road. And I think we're at this point now where we're seeing this combination of the time being up for a lot of either data center contracts, server infrastructure, things of that nature, as well as newer thoughts, newer methodologies of people coming into leadership roles and leadership positions within companies that are more cloud native, more cloud friendly. And so they're taking these companies who've kind of dragged their feet for the longest time, being like, hey, we're not really interested in doing this cloud thing. And now they have this new leadership, this new blood. And they're basically saying, look, you're 5 years too late. We need to get to the cloud. We need to get to the cloud now. And so a lot of conversations I have with clients is, how can I get to the cloud? How quickly can I get to the cloud? And then how can I start modernizing my operations to take advantage of that? Because my 4 other competitors have probably beat me to it, and I need to play catch up for a lot of organizations. So yeah, that's been kind of the last trend, I think, over probably the last 18 months I've seen.
Sure. Yeah,
and it's now shifting. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, are you kind of seeing, I'm trying to work out whether or not patterns for the same kind of motivations to move to the cloud are similar across in the US as they are, to kind of maybe smaller companies in the UK where I work. But,
Yeah.
Are you finding that their motivations are well-founded? Are they looking to jump on this digital transformation story and it's all about that innovation piece? Or, Are you finding there's a mix between kind of cost savings and other motivations to move? What's your take on that, Derek?
It's been a pretty good mix. A lot of companies obviously are worried about cost, and kind of dispelling the notion from a cost savings perspective is a lot of people think that, hey, if I just lift and shift my stuff into a cloud provider, with Azure, I'm going to instantly witness some cloud savings, and that's not necessarily always the case depending on the client.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the real benefit of the cloud and where clients actually see the most cost savings is when they start that modernization of those applications, right? Not just running them on VMs, but how do I get them into something like, an Azure container instance or an AKS or Azure, app services or a function, right? Something that's more driven, that's cloud native, or at least, modified enough to where you can take advantage of those services and not necessarily scrap the whole architecture of their workload or their application. And that's where we start seeing clients realize, true cost savings. And, they're also seeing, the other benefits of their app or their workloads being, modernized, being more, customer friendly. They're getting more positive feedback, both internally from their organization, as well as externally from their clients. They're starting to pick up their pace of development. So there's a lot of benefits from that perspective that I think clients are looking to take advantage of. They're just being more methodical, I think, in their approach. Whereas I think early on, a lot of clients were just kind of in a shotgun, right? They just blasted their way in there and they kind of worried about things after the dust settled. Whereas I think now with this new round of digital transformation, people are being more methodical because I think they kind of learned their lesson that, they can't just blast their way into the cloud. They need to kind of plan it out and be very prescriptive on how they're building their environments out. Otherwise, their cost is going to be huge. Their governance is going to be out of control. And so that's kind of where, from our perspective, we're seeing, this huge emphasis not only on cloud adoption frameworks, but, enterprise scale type landing zones, being very deliberate about how you're building out your cloud architecture and what they can do to scale incrementally and kind of not this big bang approach that I think we saw probably a couple of years ago with a lot of customers.
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of touched upon the enterprise scale piece, because I found that to be a really, really interesting conversational point, around, whatever kind of business you're dealing with at the time, whether it's a small business or it's a large scalable business up to that kind of enterprise level. I mean, do you want to give us your take on enterprise scale, Derek? How do you kind of frame that with customers, and how full on do you go with that kind of that architecture that Microsoft have put together?
I tend to frame it around whether, kind of the first introduction we have with a lot of clients is have they even heard of it? And surprisingly, the answer is probably around 50 to 60% no. And for us in the industry, I feel like, how have you not heard about it? But, we're, a lot of our clients may not necessarily be paying, as up to date as we are from that perspective. I mean, I have to think enterprise landing zones are 2 years old now.
Yeah, something
when
like
they came out that first, something like that. Yeah, about 2.5 years old. But it seems like right now and is kind of the perfect environment as what's really helped these enterprise landing zone frameworks take off. And I think what really we frame it around for a lot of our clients is having this modular capability to scale their infrastructure out within Azure, whether it be you're taking advantage of IaaS or even PaaS level services. So from a Microsoft perspective, the landing zone environment has various different architectures catered to different business units. So I think for smaller organizations, we kind of scale it down. Maybe they only need like an identity subscription, a monitoring, and maybe 1 or 2 landing zones. They may not necessarily have anything on-prem that we have to worry about. So maybe they go cloud native with Azure Active Directory, things of that nature. Do they take advantage of Azure DevOps? Depends. Some of them don't have developer organizations, some do. So that's always been kind of 50-50 with smaller organizations. And then, as we kind of go up and scale, you see a lot of customers, then, they get to that tipping point of, do they go, true hub and spoke with just virtual networks, or do they go hub and spoke with something more like Azure Virtual WAN or some other large networking tool like Aviatrix or something, third party of that nature. So it's kind of, tipping the scale as you get into the bigger clients, right? They get that true hub and spoke architecture. They've got their management group hierarchy all set up. They've got their identity, their management. Yep, perfect. Management operations capability, right? They've got that core networking capability. And then from there, right, it's really about defining the type of landing zones you want. And I know, at least from best practice perspective, right, you've got your kind of specific ones where things like SAP and Oracle, right, those are all huge workloads, and we tend to recommend isolating those off because of resource constraints and limits that may be placed. They really need to kind of live on their own, and even some governance stuff may need to live on their own, right? If there is like a healthcare requirement or a data residency requirement or something of that nature, right, we may isolate that workload kind of over by itself. And then from there, it's really all about, is the workload internal or external, right? And that tends to be a huge differentiating factor, right? Is it a corporate application or is it an online application? Because we obviously need to put more emphasis on online from a security standpoint, more HTTPS based workloads, whereas corporate applications, right, users may interact with those in a more myriad of different ways, right? It could be VPN, it could be something like a Bastion host, it could be web-based, right? So that's a little more differentiating from that perspective. And then we tend to start building out their DevOps and kind of showing them as part of how to roll this out, right? We kind of want to adopt DevOps practices from the get-go. So treating all of this infrastructure that we're building as infrastructure as code, walking through the Git process, versioning it, how do they update all these templates, whether they're using something like Terraform or ARM or, Bicep, hopefully down here in the future. A lot of those clients getting kind of that rolling up and getting them into a DevOps mentality. Because even if they're not developers, I think DevOps practices have a huge benefit to an organization kind of as a whole, even if you don't apply it to technology, right? There's ways to kind of get those tacit benefits from a workflow perspective to kind of help automate, treat those tasks in a more repeatable and trusted manner versus, a lot of manual kind of having to step through like 10 gates just to get something done. We just don't operate in that kind of speed anymore. Everything's, now, fast. And so it's hard for a lot of these, cloud teams that 10, 15 years ago, right, deploying a workload took 6 months, and now it's got to take 6 weeks or less. Yeah. And so getting people to kind of get in that mentality is kind of where we kind of weave all of this together and stitch it together to make it truly a transformative process for them.
How are you finding that, Derek? I mean, in terms of, I always love to talk this diagram through, but I think in my experience, whenever we start, depending again your audience, like your operations folk versus your software developer side, how are you finding that conversation with the whole DevOps, and how do you kind of frame it from an infrastructure as code piece when you're looking to maybe you are looking to lift and shift some stuff over to into Azure to kind of hit the ground running? Are you looking at on an application by application landing zone basis? Are you looking to just do the platform subscriptions? Have you got any kind of good hints and tips with how you handle those kind of conversations?
Yeah, I mean, typically you want to treat it as kind of gauging where the organization is. And ultimately, I think the biggest factor is kind of getting everybody to buy into a new culture paradigm, right? It's everybody's on the same team, as I like to call the cloud team. There's not the database team, there's not the network team, there's not, right? Cloud encompasses all of that. So whether you like it or you don't, all of you are going to have to start working together as your company makes this shift to the cloud and starts, operating, whatever workloads you decide to place in there from a business perspective. So getting kind of that initial buy-in, typically from senior leadership, and getting that kind of filtered down through the organization. And then once from there, right, it really takes on more of an application by application approach, because some applications just are not ready or never will be ready for the cloud. And so you kind of have to get clients into the cloud with those applications that are ready and that make the most sense. And then, there's going to be that painful examination of those workloads that either, are going to take some pretty heavy refactoring or re-architecting or simple retirement. I mean, there just may not be enough of a benefit or justification to say, hey, yeah, we should move this to the cloud. And half the time we hear from the clients, oh yeah, it's only one person so and so that uses this every like 2 or 3 months, and it's like, then why do you still have this? Like, we need to figure out something better to help this along, so you're just not wasting money on this entire workload that could be chewing up, who knows, like 10, 20 hours a week. Like, that's just inefficient. So that's, I think, where operations folks and other folks that we talk to, right, they start realizing those benefits. Like, they can use the cloud as a justification to kind of finally have those final conversations with a lot of business application owners, where they're like, hey, we're going to move this to the cloud. Here's some of the stuff you're going to see. And you get a lot of business app owners who are like super jazzed. And then you get some of these other app owners who've just been clinging on to this little tiny app for dear life for the last 5 years, where, the business is finally like, hey, we're done with this. Like, we're going to find something new, find something different, and, move on from this, or we're going to completely, flip it on its head and make this, more beneficial to the business at whole, so we can get more utilization out of it.
I mean, it's funny that you say that, Derek, actually, because I think some of my experiences, I think people think that when you start talking about, digital transformation and shifting to the cloud, that all of a sudden you're going to come in as some, miracle worker and spread some pixie dust around the estate, and their infrastructure is going to be golden. And I always tell the customers I work with, exactly like you say, that there's no magic behind this. This is it's at times quite a laborious, painstaking process of weeding through what servers a company has got, what they're using them for, what back-end databases they talk to, and then trying to consolidate and make those motivations, make it worthwhile to go to the cloud. There's no. I wish there was a big bag of pixie dust we could sprinkle.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But I think it's fair to say now, with tool sets, some of the tool sets that we've got with natively to do assessments like Azure Migrate. Have you got much experience with using those kind of native toolings, Derek?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we take advantage of those native toolings whenever possible. Azure Migrate, I think, has come a long way, and it's going to come even further. As Movair, right? Microsoft acquired Movair year and a half ago, and so they've been steadily integrating that capability into Azure Migrate, and I think it's only going to get that much better as the native tooling matures and they're able to identify even more capabilities. I think we've added on now web app migration capabilities, and now even Azure virtual desktop migration capabilities within the native tooling. So,
I think I even saw that they're digging down an assessment I only ran very recently, actually, and I noticed there's some more stuff in there about SQL as well, which was quite cool to see.
Yeah, they rolled that out 6-7 months ago. They've added in a lot deeper SQL capability that used to be kind of separate with the data migration assistant tool and the database migration service. I still love leveraging some of those tools for kind of targeted use cases, and when it comes to certain migration scenarios for updating schemas and looking at feature comparisons, because it still offers a nice picture for a lot of clients, especially the data, when you're talking to the database administrators, saying, okay, yeah, here's your SQL 2014 workload, here's what's going to work, here's what's not going to work. And then when we talk to them about taking advantage of something like an Azure SQL database or an Azure SQL managed instance, you can have kind of those more transformative conversations with them, right, as they move into a more platform native capability, instead of being like, okay, yeah, I'm just going to slap a SQL server in Azure for you and it's just going to be as is for you. It becomes, I found more of those conversations to be more challenging for a lot of clients to then have to turn around and continue to manage the as is environment within Azure. Not that there aren't use cases for staying on SQL on VMs, but I think as clients realize the more modern approach from a database perspective, I think a lot of the database administrators appreciate kind of having that cloud native capability. And there's still certain limitations that, just they kind of have to work around that don't make it ideal. But I think more and more I've seen more clients start adopting those native capabilities from, whether it be a database perspective or a web app perspective. They're not just sticking with the VM as is approach when it comes to Azure Migrate, because the tooling is starting to give them more of that data to say, okay, yeah, you can go this way. It will work. It's more familiar. It's not, some weird concept to them to operate in that fashion. And then ultimately, right, they see the efficiency and the cost benefits of going with cloud native. And I think that overall ends up being a win-win for a lot of people.
Yeah, and of course the dependency scanning that went GA a few months ago. I mean,
Yes.
that was on off for a long time, and I think
that was a lot of there was a lot of hesitancy for a lot of people to use Azure Migrate for that very reason. I think that's So I'm glad it's gotten to that point. Hopefully, that drives more people to adopt it. But yeah, I mean, tools like Cloudamize, Mover, and others, I mean, that's where they made a name for themselves, was around that dependency mapping, because in Azure Migrate, it's just
the agentless one, wasn't it? It was
agentless. Yeah. How do I do it without installing something? How do I get it to be as accurate as possible? And that's been a struggle. It's been a struggle.
Yeah, no, but certainly, I think, I agree with you, Derek. I think the native tooling now to kind of assist those cloud journeys is certainly sometimes, you are questioning whether to use third-party services now. I think, certainly Microsoft seemed to have put a lot of time and effort, and like you say, with the recent acquisition of Mover, I guess that's only going to get better now. The assessment reports that we can get out of it. I mean, sticking briefly with the enterprise scale model here that we've kind of got on the screen. I mean, what's your take in, we hear about when we put stuff into the cloud, it's about putting those guardrails and that governance in place. And just to pick you up on that point that you mentioned earlier on, I like the way you framed it, is that lots of businesses just went gung-ho and kind of, threw stuff into the cloud and are kind of reeling back maybe a little bit now. Is it probably fair to say, and taking stock
absolutely.
As to what they've done?
Yeah.
Have you got any view on the whole Azure policy, the governance, those guide rails? What's your take on that, Derek? And have you come across any neat ways of framing those kinds of conversations with customers?
Yeah, a very easy conversation is you can. And I hate to do this because I feel like I'm scaring the customers, but I can literally tell them, like, hey, if I am a user at your company, I can spin up my own pay-as-you-go subscription with my work email and automatically associate it to your tenant and start running up costs. And the eyes of like the IT managers go so wide. They're like, I feel like I might give them a heart attack. But that's, that's not my intention, but it's just kind of goes to show, like, the reason why the guardrails are there and why we want to implement them is so that, as the model even shows, and right, those sandbox level subscriptions, but there's a management group in there called decommissioned. And that's where I love telling people, like, in that instance, hey, when somebody does that, I can immediately decommission that subscription, right? And they can't do anything. And that's through policy, right? I can put policy in place that says, hey, if a subscription lands in this decommissioned management group, all VM, SKUs are denied, all resource group regions are denied. I can't, you basically just don't allow them to do anything. And I think as customers, you kind of solve those easy parts for them. And when you tackle those type of problems, it opens up the doors to kind of have those more complex discussions around, okay, how do I put policies in place to effectively give my IT organizations, right? Because there tends to be multiple within enterprises, the ability to still service the business, but not have the CFO, screaming in the middle of the night due to, some giant bill or, something going on or whatnot. So I think ultimately exposing, people outside of IT as well. One of the common approaches we use at Trace3, from our perspective, is when we do enterprise scale landing zones with our cloud adoption is it's a holistic approach. We don't just say, hey, IT team, let's take a look at this. We invite people from, finance and the other business units to take part in this, because I think the more people you get to kind of realize, here's what we're doing, here's how everyone kind of needs to collaborate and work together. And then here, where are the rails from an overall business perspective? Because where IT might think the rails are, may not be where some of the other businesses units within the organization think the rails are. And so we kind of get a nice, happy collaboration between the two, saying, hey, here's what I need from, app one business unit in order to make the business function. And then IT kind of hears that and they're okay, well, here's where, our standards lie. And they kind of, help work to make everything fit a lot better. And so it leads more to that, and eventually I'm going to circle back to this, is back into that same DevOps mindset, right? Not letting the business function as all these various business units silos, right? Bringing those units together, having those conversations around policy and governance, I think is the best icebreaker to getting an organization to kind of slowly get that wheel churning from just a complete DevOps mindset, right? Because if you collaborate better, you don't have IT getting upset with, business unit A, B, or C about their app, right? There's those open lines of communication. They collaborate better. We find that the policy management and the governance enforcement tends to be less cumbersome, less friction around them. And so we get, more adoption out of the overall business as a whole, because everybody had a say, everybody had input. And so the methodology going forward tends to be a very highly adopted approach amongst the various business units. And we find that, organizations really want to then move even more workloads into the cloud, because it's not such an isolated event. It's more of a broad company involved process. So that's probably the best, at least in my opinion, way. And it is tough for a lot of organizations who did shotgun their way in there. But I think with that, with a lot of that approach, we're finding organizations to hopefully, they haven't really been like, yeah, we're gonna be done with this cloud thing and move back down to on-prem. But we kind of help right that ship, and we end up seeing an increase in cloud consumption, and increase in cloud productivity from their perspective.
But I guess it's like you say, when businesses did take that initial plunge, or that like you say, the shotgun approach, as you put it, dropping everything into a cloud platform, it's probably fair to say that a lot of the terminology, a lot of the things, the concepts and the ways that we can work now today with things like enterprise scale weren't necessarily there or fully or well understood by many people outside of that tech arena. And in a lot of cases, probably fair to say that a lot of those traditional technical skills in businesses, they probably didn't. Like you said earlier, this enterprise scale is what, in your experience, you're getting like 50-60% no. People haven't heard of this thing. So, I think, from I speak from my perspective, which is very, very similar to yours. I think in terms that, it's not bad. It's not the end of the world that people don't know about these things. But I think it's more around recognition and kind of almost waving the flag to say to businesses, look, you absolutely do need to speak cross-department. I completely echo exactly what you said there, Derek, in terms of getting more business-wide stakeholders involved with these decisions. And, how do you find that wider stakeholder mapping? How do you find their knowledge of these cloud concepts, Derek?
It's definitely not really there. And I think one of the best ways, we as a community and we as, the tech professionals can kind of help address that. And Microsoft kind of, I think, led this approach a couple years ago, is all of their salespeople had to take Azure fundamentals, right? And so we, here at our organization, we have this cool program called the Trace 3 Legends program. And that kind of took on a similar approach. We offered free cloud training along with some other network security trainings to all of our employees internally, irregardless of what facet of the business they were in. Sure. And the adoption that we saw was absolutely tremendous. So we then in turn took that externally. And so any of our Trace 3 clients that we have this Legends program where you can come and get cloud fundamentals as well as cloud architect level training for free. And I think that's where addressing that knowledge gap is the best thing, because the IT team, yes, they do hold a lot of that knowledge and kind of 50-50 on whether or not they're highly trained in Azure or AWS or GCP. So there's definitely a skill shortage there. But man, when you exit the IT, that skill shortage goes off a cliff. I mean, it's even larger. So we as an organization, and I think we as a tech community as a whole, have to reach out and kind of help lift those boats of the non-tech professionals. And I'm not saying everyone go out and be, an Azure administrator or an Azure solution architect. But, at least having a fundamental understanding of what cloud platform your business is going to adopt, and, whether that be Azure or AWS or GCP, right? All of them have a fundamentals level entry point. And I think it would be very beneficial to an organization to encourage their employees outside of the IT world to take that skill training. And I think if you see organizations get behind that type of skill training and that adoption, I think that would greatly help a lot of the digital transformations that we see among our clients, and see further adoption, because then though they don't feel like they're in the dark or they're being left out, or they're being treated in some other way, right? So I think the bigger the door we open for the non-technical aspects of businesses, the better adoption rate, the better understanding we see from a lot of them. So I think that's been a very successful approach from our perspective, is offering that initiative to our clients.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That sounds like a really great way of doing it, to be honest, Eric. I think, and again, you mentioned at the very beginning when we started talking about enterprise scale, but the whole cloud adoption framework, it's certainly, I mean, what is that to you? The things that Microsoft have put together. I mean, do you want to describe that for our viewers so that they've got an idea?
Yeah, I mean, really, there's multiple pillars of the cloud adoption framework. I think ultimately for me, the pillars that I think, right, the through pillars, that governance, that cost, and that security, because everyone's going to adopt cloud in kind of their own little unique way, and Microsoft lays down kind of their 5 general pillars. But I think the biggest through models are governance, security, and cost, because ultimately I think we've found out through all the clients that Microsoft has worked with, right? Those are the 3 that matter the most, no matter what organization you talk to, right? I don't want to have some ransomware incident. I don't want somebody breaching my data. I don't want to be spending a giant, thing amount of money. And I don't want my, organization going off in some shadow IT world that I can't control. So I think from a cloud adoption perspective, establishing that central group that we call the Cloud Center of Excellence, getting multiple business units involved in that, and I mean both technical and non-technical. And it's not saying that everybody has to have, a accountable action or responsible action, right? If we're talking about a RACI matrix, but having, be informed or be, notified of, hey, the CCOE is kind of setting these new standards for cloud. Here's what they are, right? So everybody in the business is kind of kept aware, and is understanding kind of where the business is going from a cloud center perspective, and then making sure there's some type of executive leadership, taking part of that in that committee or that group. So whether it be the CIO, the CTO, the CEO, some executive, right, is being a part of that, so that as a business you're seeing, hey, this is serious. This is kind of where we're setting the direction, and I'm included. I see, that they're taking into account our business. We're being informed of kind of where they're going, or we submitted feedback. They took that feedback and gave us their response. And then from that CCOE, right, you see a lot of higher adoption rates from a lot of clients. Whereas if you don't kind of have that central thing that ties all the disparate things together, I think that's where we start to see cloud adoption stumble and tumble, and people retreat out of, because either people don't feel included, they don't feel like their voice is being heard, or there's no clear direction. And so that's where organizations tend to struggle. And I think from our cloud adoption perspective, that's the main focus, is getting that CCOE in, getting those 3 through pillars as a throughput, and then letting those clients roll forward from that perspective.
No, it's perfect. And yeah, I mean, it's been really, interesting to hear your take on the whole cloud adoption, the enterprise scale thing, and the kind of experiences you've been getting with customers. Because I think it is very true that as much as businesses are on this cloud adoption journey, I think it's probably fair to say that the industry as a whole is on the cloud adoption journey as well, to understand what does it mean, what does it mean to many businesses. And I think to a certain extent, there's certainly sort of well polished PowerPoint presentations put up and put together, but I think sometimes when you can kind of boil it down to its most practical parts, what do these elements mean when I go and do these things for a customer? What does it actually tangibly mean that we have to do? Like you say, what actionable things are there that I need to do to make this good for my business or the business I work for? And I think for me, the cloud adoption framework that's been pulled together is like you said earlier, it's that whole, things that lots of businesses, Microsoft customers, Microsoft themselves have all done over the last, 7, 8, 9 years. And it's almost like a big manual of things that you probably want to consider or keep in the back of your mind as you're doing something, or actual tangible, make sure you do this set of things. It's really just about helping us all, I guess, move on and move into the cloud. Because I think even taking it that stage further, once we're in the cloud and moving into that innovation space, that kind of thing, that app modernization, that innovation space, it's probably fair to say that, to the best will in the world, unless you've really mapped out a very specific application or something for your business, that space is probably, there's so much opportunity there for all the businesses using cloud at the moment that, look, there is no manual, yeah? It's down to the people that you've got doing this work for you, I suppose. Well, what's your take on that, Derek?
No, I would agree with that take. I think ultimately we're still seeing a lot of organizations just get into the cloud. And so I think app modernization is the next phase, right? A lot of clients that I've worked with, a lot of organizations that I see, they either have to kind of cycle back on that cloud adoption because it didn't go right the first time, or, it's going well and they've gotten that first phase in, right? I've lifted and shifted a lot of my stuff into Azure, but now how do I take it even further, right? And so a lot of organizations, I want to say I saw a study somewhere, it's only like 20% or something maybe less than that are taking advantage of app modernization. So that means there's around 80% of businesses that haven't even touched it yet. So, I mean, that's going to be the next frontier. So I think you're seeing the tech industry as a whole. We're seeing a lot of chatter around Kubernetes. We're seeing a lot of talk around containers. We're seeing a lot of talk around, serverless functions, things of that nature, right? That we're getting that train and we're running it. And so now it's going to crash into the business world probably here in the next 6-12 months, to kind of start that approach and get organizations to kind of start modernizing these applications. And I think from an adoption perspective, if clients haven't at least mapped out their initial way to do things, they're going to start falling behind by quite a bit. And so we may need to come up with a rapid manual for clients, because they're the gap between where their competitors are who did this already and where they are is going to just get wider and wider. So I think it's going to be a greater challenge if clients haven't adopted cloud at this point. They need to do so soon, because the market is usually set by the leader. And so if you don't find yourself leading the market or being right there next to the leader, you're going to be trailing quick, fast, and in a hurry. And I think the best example I have of this, and I wish I stole this deck from the Microsoft folks who gave it to me, but it talks about the companies that are the most successful, or have been the most profitable in the last 100 years, right? And for the first 70 or 80 years, the list was very rigid. Like, we're talking Macy's, Sears, like people who've been there for, a long, long time. And then in the last 20 years, man, it's been Netflix, Amazon, Google, the list changes, I swear, on like a weekly basis, about the billions of dollars, right, that they raise. And I think that speaks to the cloud in and of itself. I think we can no longer rely on, something being stable and being, rock solid for months or even years on ends. I mean, the market's going to change on almost a multi-week basis. So if you don't have an organization that's kind of adapted to that kind of fluidity and that volatility, it's going to be a struggle. And so I think ultimately from a cloud adoption perspective, that's kind of the mindset we try to set with our clients is, hey, look, it seems tough, it seems hard right now, but going forward, you're really setting yourself up for success, because we're getting you into that methodology of, hey, things are going to be very fluid, things are going to be very, unstable, but that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Kind of embrace the ups and downs, right? Because that's where we're seeing things trends, right? It's flexible, it's not rigid.
No, absolutely, and yeah, brilliant way to frame that. To be honest, Derek, I do like the way you've done that. I think, I must have seen something along those lines, because as soon as you started talking about that, then it's so true, isn't it? The last 20 years, the number of companies that, tech companies in particular, seem to have just gone through the roof. So, yeah, I think it's very good insights. I think anybody watching this that maybe is just starting on their cloud journey is to heed those words with the warning that it's meant to be there. Because I think we all want to be a success in the companies that we work for, and of course the companies that we work for, we want them to be successful. And it's almost at that stage now, whether you like it or not, the scale and feature set and capability that using cloud services gives you over traditional on-prem data centers, or hardware and capex, sort of sweating those assets gives you now is it's just not on a fair or level playing field anymore. So I think anybody that is still maybe out there thinking, yeah, we don't need to do cloud, you might want to start, if you haven't already, have a chat with yourself. I think is probably the best way to frame it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And really, the funny thing is about, we've seen this drive of cloud being adopted, but the funny thing is it's also driven on-prem and even data center capabilities, right? It's lifted all boats. And I think that's kind of where cloud is this unique central thing. Not only has it, expanded in its feature set and it's expanded in its capabilities that on-prem can't match, but that, by no means have they sat there and advocated the destruction of on-prem, right? They've said, okay, there are reasons on-prem has its place, right? It has its viability from an organization perspective, and we want to help bring cloud to the on-prem, right? You see things like Azure Stack, Azure Arc, bringing cloud services to on-prem and in a hybrid fashion, because cloud understands that on-prem will not go away. And that's not to say that, depending on your organization, if you're a startup, maybe you are purely cloud native, and that's fine. But a lot of organizations are not. And so, cloud has kind of been this unique way to solve that challenge of, we can address a lot of the needs that organizations have, but at the same time, still keep what they have, or still address some of those unique situations where on-prem still makes the most sense. And how do we bring that cutting edge technology, those benefits to customers in an on-prem fashion? And so I don't see it as a mutually exclusive thing. I think adopting cloud just makes good business sense from, whether you're on-prem majority or you've already been in the cloud majority. I think it just makes the most sense to further your business along to, whatever its ultimate goal is. And if that's to be, Microsoft and dominate the world, or AWS and dominate the world, it really doesn't matter. It's been kind of sense. Yeah, that makes the most sense. I don't know if there's really a good way to tie that part off.
Not at all. I think it's that thing, isn't it, where you just, for businesses to leverage the most appropriate thing for their business. But I think it's that thing of cloud computers certainly turned a lot of the IT industry on its head over the last decade, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down or stopping for anybody at the moment. So, yeah, I think the whole hybrid story for those businesses that need that in between this transition phase, I think, my mind, it seems as though Microsoft are pinning a lot of their bets on hybrid, and it's like you say, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that whole, okay, we can still do stuff on-prem, of course we can, but really, do you know what I mean? I think, is it a marketing sticking plaster? Is it?
No, I don't think. Yeah, I think hybrid still makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. There are definite use cases for people to leverage hybrid capabilities. And I think that's where Microsoft's probably the most uniquely positioned to take advantage of that, because unlike Google and Amazon, Microsoft's had this diagonal through line, right? Google never developed its own server operating system or, an email messaging system until Gmail. But there are a lot of products that Microsoft offers that its competitors, at least from Amazon and a Google perspective, never did. And so they're kind of uniquely positioned to say, hey, you still want to run that stuff on-prem for, give me an X reason, that's great. I can still bring the power of the cloud to that because I developed and I owned that piece of software. So I can bring my cloud compute to you. I can bring my file storage to you. I can bring Kubernetes to you. I can bring database to you, right? It really doesn't matter. Microsoft, I think, has that capability to provide you a cloud level service, whether you're on-prem, hybrid, or fully cloud. And that, I think, that's been the biggest through line for them that makes the most sense, and why we've seen a lot of adoption amongst Azure. Not to say that, AWS, yes, technically they're still the market leader, but I think Azure's been gaining on them fairly heavily. And Google's also starting to come up in a number of areas. But I think that's what makes Azure the most unique play out of the three, is they have that line that the others just don't. So.
No, it's good. Great insights. No, absolutely brilliant. No, but Derek, this has been a super fun chat. Really, just kind of, tidbit of information after tidbit of information. It's really great to hear it from your perspective as well. So, I mean, look, before we wrap up this, episode this week, there's always one question I like to ask every guest that comes on, and it's really around. It's a bit of an open-ended question, but why are we doing all this, Derek? Why are we working in the cloud? Why are we learning all this cool new tech and ways of being and the ways of working? From your point of view, where are we going over the next 5 to 10 years? What's the next big bets in tech for you?
I think the next big bets for tech in me are, probably somewhere around IoT and AI and ML. I think the biggest bet is, how do we start leveraging cloud and technology to solve some of our biggest technical or our biggest challenges outside of business? And I think, as the world has grown, right, we've figured out better ways to, farm and grow crops and provide food for 9 billion people on the world today, somewhere around there. I don't think that number is shrinking. Take the pandemic, for instance. I mean, we developed a vaccine in a year. That wouldn't have been possible 20, 30 years ago. Sure. The cloud AI ML capabilities made that happen. And so I think as we as cloud professionals, why we keep diving into this is, I think ultimately we care a lot about the world we live in, and we see a lot of the possibilities that I think this technology can be applied to solve a lot of everyday challenges. And I think the best, probably to steal a line from the movie, what is it, Iron Man or Iron Man 2, right? Better life can be achieved through technology. I think it was what Howard Stark said. And, and to think in, years past, right, we used to have the World's Fair, right, where all these inventors and all these people would come to New York or Chicago to show off all these amazing things. I think that's the modern day cloud, is this giant World's Fair of people all throughout the world, us tech professionals, thinking of ways to solve various challenges. And the benefit of, the age we live in is we get to share all of that, not only with ourselves, but with the world as a whole. And I think in the next 5 years, you're just going to see that get amplified even more as, new things keep coming up. And I think we as a group of people, as a community, are there to meet that challenge and really drive it home that, we're here to help kind of solve those problems and lead the world, I think, into a very unique digital age that we haven't seen in recent memory.
I love it, Derek. Yeah, I mean, it's like I was listening to some kind of inspirational monologue then. But no, honestly,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love it, and I can't agree with you more. I
Channeling,
think
yeah, channeling my inner Gary cynic, right?
no, but I mean, it's great to hear. Like I
Yeah.
think I've said now, the last few guests I've had on this show, it seems to be a common theme that everybody seems to be looking to the future and really kind of circling a lot of a lot of hopes around that AI, ML, IoT, that data, that big data piece.
Hmm.
Data being the new currency, that kind of vibe. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be quite an interesting few years as we all build up towards that. But Derek, this has been such a fun chat. Thanks so much for giving up your time and coming on and saying hello to me for tonight.
uh,
Before we wrap up the call, are there any other last parting words of advice that you might have?
Last parting words of advice. Remember to breathe and take a break. I think that's the biggest
Yeah.
thing. I think you had Mike Pfeiffer on recently, and he and I
Mm.
talk off and on. But I think you know we talk about all the things that cloud does, and all of the vast things that are available to it. I think we forget the best thing to do is to kind of take a step away and breathe. And even you, right? I remember you took a vacation, right? And you kind of checked out for 2 weeks, and I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing we don't. So, for anyone listening to this, hey, just take time to focus on you. And, if you feel you need a break or you need to just kind of check out for a couple of days so you can recharge, relax, do it. You need to invest in you. So, that's probably my best parting words I can offer anybody.
No, perfect. Yeah, I mean, couldn't have said them better myself. Yeah, you're so right. But yeah, Derek, thanks so much again for coming on. We'll leave it for there for now, but I will no doubt keep in touch with you over the social media, and we'll catch up at some point over the coming weeks, I'm sure. Anyway, but for
Yep.
now, thanks for being such an awesome guest. Thanks a lot, Derek.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, John.
Not at all. See you
All
soon.
right. Take care.
Helps if you press the right.